Welcome to Battle Cry, where the blood, grit, and sacrifice of American warriors echo through the fiercest battles in American military history. From the first musket fired at Lexington to the firefights of Fallujah, we relive the turning points that shaped our freedom and incite patriotism. Stand tall, stand proud. The story begins now.
Okay, picture this. October 19th, 1781, Yorktown, Virginia. You've got the British redcoats all dressed up in new uniforms, marching out. They look sharp, but their eyes are definitely downcast.
Yeah, you can imagine the mood. Solemn drums, a slow march.
Exactly. And then there's that story, maybe apocryphal, maybe not, that the band played The World Turned Upside Down. I mean, talk about irony.
It's such a striking image, isn't it?
Oh.
And it really sticks with you. But Yorktown, well, it was so much more than just one battle ending. It was this convergence, this masterclass in strategy, intelligence work, and absolutely crucially, international politics.
A masterclass. Okay, I like that. So it suggests there's more going on beneath the surface than just troop movements on a map. What are the sort of key threads we need to pull on here? Strategy, intelligence, why Cornwallis surrendered. So today, let's really dig into that. We'll unpack the decisions, the missteps, the moments of brilliance that led to this huge turning point. We want to focus on the strategy, the intel game from both sides, and of course, the absolutely essential role of the French. And we're drawing all of this from the sources you've shared. Sound good?
Sounds great. Let's start with the British side of things. So Cornwallis, he'd been campaigning up through the Carolinas, moves into Virginia, skirmishing with Lafayette, the usual back and forth.
Right, trying to pacify the South.
Exactly. Then General Clinton, his superior up in New York, orders him to basically find and fortify a deep-water port. The idea was to have a solid base for naval operations, maybe resupply, maybe even an evacuation point if needed.
And he chooses Yorktown on that peninsula.
He chooses Yorktown.
Right.
And Lafayette, who's shadowing him, was apparently, pretty bewildered by this. It seemed like such a vulnerable spot, potentially easy to trap by land and, crucially, by sea.
Hindsight makes it look like a terrible move, definitely. But there was a bigger picture for the British, wasn't there? This whole southern strategy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
After the disaster at Saratoga up north, they really pivoted.
Yeah.
The thinking was, look, the southern colonies are full of loyalists just waiting for a chance to rise up.
They really believed that.
They seem to.
Yeah.
You had reports coming back from figures like Governor Murray of Virginia, Lord William Campbell in South Carolina, saying things like, send us a few regulars and thousands will flock to the king's standard. Very optimistic, maybe overly so.
So wishful thinking driving strategy, that sounds dangerous.
It is. And this is where the intelligence piece really starts to, unravel for them. They didn't do what we now call proper intelligence preparation of the battlefield. They didn't fully grasp the terrain, the logistics, or, critically, the actual level of loyalist support versus patriot sentiment.
How could they get it so wrong?
Well, look at someone like James Simpson, one of their agents. He was mostly talking to other loyalists. So the information he's sending back reinforces the idea that everyone's just waiting for the British Army to show up. It's confirmation bias, pure and simple. They believed the reports that fit their existing hopes.
Believing what you want to hear. Classic intelligence pitfall, right?
Absolutely. And it wasn't just a one-off problem for the British. Their whole intelligence system historically had issues. It was often decentralized, sometimes more focused on internal security, like spies in London, than on foreign or military intel. Leadership changed. People had to constantly, reinvent the wheel.
So a systemic problem, not just bad luck in the South.
I think so. You see it earlier, too. General Howe in Philadelphia, back in '77, he just didn't set up good spy networks. Clinton later on did a bit better in the North, especially with Major John Andre running things for a while.
Andre, right? The one involved with Benedict Arnold.
That's him. But even then, Andre often seemed more like a recorder of information than a deep analyst. And Cornwallis himself. He kind of fit that older 18th century mold where the general is his own intelligence chief, which sounds impressive, but it often leads to reactive decisions, not a coordinated intel effort.
So they're collecting bits and pieces maybe, but not putting it together into a coherent picture or not analyzing it properly.
Exactly. It's not always about getting the intel. It's about understanding what it means and what to do with it. And while the British are struggling with this, another major player is entering the game, or rather, stepping up their involvement. France.
Ah, yes, the French connection. Crucial. But let's be clear, this wasn't purely about shared ideals of liberty, was it?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, maybe for some individuals, but for the French state, This was pure, real politic. It was driven by self-interest. They were still smarting from losing the 7 Years' War to Britain.
Right. They lost Canada, influence in India.
Exactly. So they saw the American Revolution as a golden opportunity to weaken their biggest rival, Britain, both militarily and financially, to sort of rebalance European power. It was basically a continuation of their long-standing rivalry, a sort of 18th century Cold War, you could say.
And this aid started sneakily, right? Covertly.
Very much so. Back in early 1776, you have this fascinating character, Beaumarchais, the playwright, actually, who wrote Figaro acting as a secret agent. He pitches this plan for indirect aid to King Louis VI, who approves it.
So weapons and supplies start flowing.
Large quantities. Muskets, cannons, gunpowder, uniforms. Officially, it's all going to the French West Indies. Plausible deniability. Lord Stormont, the British ambassador in Paris, he wasn't fooled. He kept protesting, look at these shipments.
But Vergennes, the French foreign minister, just brushed him off.
Pretty much. Vergennes played it very skillfully. He'd say things like, why would my king support rebels against another monarch? That makes no sense. It was a clever diplomatic dance.
But surely British intelligence wasn't completely in the dark.
Oh, not at all. And this is where it gets really interesting. British intel knew about a lot of this. They had agents tracking shipments. And here's the kicker. They had a high-level source right inside the American delegation in Paris, Edward Bancroft.
Bancroft, he was working with Franklin and Dean, wasn't he? Trusted.
Completely trusted by Franklin. But secretly, he was feeding detailed, accurate intelligence directly to the British the whole time the Franco-American alliance was being negotiated. Arthur Lee, another American diplomat, suspected him, even presented evidence.
And Franklin didn't believe it.
Refused to believe it. Whether it was trust, stubbornness, or something else, we don't know for sure. But it shows, again, having the intel isn't enough if the leadership won't accept or act on it. A massive intelligence coup for the British, largely nullified.
Wow. So the British knew France was arming the Americans, maybe even knew the scale, but couldn't leverage it effectively. And then there's the naval aspect. Britain usually ruled the waves. What happened there?
Politics back home played a role. Lord Sandwich, head of the Admiralty, faced pressure to limit the number of ships sent to the Americas, maybe protecting the Channel, maybe budget constraints, maybe underestimating the threat. Whatever the reason, it meant the Royal Navy wasn't as overwhelmingly dominant in American waters as it could have been.
And that opened the door for the French Navy.
It set the stage perfectly for the French to achieve, at least temporarily, local naval superiority. And that brings us to the Allied masterstroke, the campaign that ends at Yorktown.
Right. So Washington, he initially wanted to attack the British stronghold in New York City, didn't he? With French help.
That was his primary goal for a long time, yes. But his own officers, and crucially Rochambeau, the French commander, they started thinking maybe Cornwallis down in Virginia is the better target. A bit softer, perhaps more achievable.
But Washington held on to the New York plan.
He did for quite a while, until mid-August 1781. That's when definitive word arrived from Admiral de Grasse, the commander of the main French fleet in the West Indies.
De Grasse. Okay, what was his plan? This is pivotal.
Absolutely pivotal. De Grasse sends word. He's sailing north, not to New York, but to the Chesapeake Bay. And he's bringing a powerful fleet, 29 warships, plus 3,000 French soldiers. He'd managed to secure agreements with the Spanish to cover French interests in the Caribbean, freeing him up to make this bold move.
A massive gamble, but potentially decisive.
Hugely decisive. And Washington, once he gets this news, switches gears instantly. And this is where his genius for deception shines. He needs to move his army south, quickly, without Clinton in New York realizing what's happening.
How did he pull that off? Moving an entire army isn't easy to hide.
He ran a brilliant deception campaign. He had fake battle plans drafted that hinted at an attack on Staten Island. He made sure known British spies were interrogated about Staten Island's defenses. He set up a huge visible camp in New Jersey, across from New York, complete with bread ovens being built, implying a long stay.
Making it look like they were settling in for a siege of New York.
Exactly. He even kept his own senior officers in the dark about the real destination until the last possible moment to prevent leaks. And Clinton. He completely bought it. He saw the initial southward march of Washington and Rochambeau's armies as just a feint, a diversion before the real attack on New York.
Masterful misdirection. While Clinton's looking north, Washington's heading south.
Precisely. And the timing of the naval movements is just critical here. De Grasse arrives in the Chesapeake Bay on August 30th. That's 5 days before the British Admiral Hood shows up. De Grasse immediately lands his troops to reinforce Lafayette, who's already pinning Cornwallis in on the land side.
So the sea door is closing.
It's closing fast. And then another key piece. Admiral Debras, commanding a smaller French squadron in Newport, Rhode Island, sails south too around August 25th. And crucially, he's bringing the heavy siege cannons needed to break down Yorktown's defenses. He takes a wide offshore route to avoid being intercepted.
Smart move. Dodging the Royal Navy.
He successfully joins up at the Grasse on September 10th. Now the French naval force is united and formidable.
Okay, so the French fleet is there, the siege guns are coming. What about the British Navy? Where are they?
Admiral Graves eventually arrives with the British fleet. He knew Debras had sailed from Newport, but he seems to have lacked really solid intelligence on de Grasse's full strength or his exact intentions.
So he sails into the Chesapeake, not fully knowing what he's up against.
It seems that way. On September 5th, the two fleets clash in the Battle of the Chesapeake, sometimes called the Battle of the Capes. It's not a totally crushing victory in terms of ships sunk, but the British fleet takes a beating. Several ships are badly damaged.
And Graves decides.
Graves decides not to re-engage the next day. He assesses the damage, considers his options, and eventually decides to withdraw back to New York to repair and regroup.
And that decision, that's huge.
It's monumental. It means the French Navy controls the Chesapeake Bay. They have clear naval superiority, maybe 3-2 in terms of battleships fit for the line. And most importantly, it means Cornwallis has no escape route by sea. The trap is now fully sprung.
Wow. So the naval battle really sealed his fate. But what about on land? Lafayette was there, but Cornwallis still had a decent force.
He did. And Lafayette was worried Cornwallis might try to break out, maybe cross the York River to escape north. So Lafayette uses his own bit of clever intelligence work.
More deception.
Absolutely. He had an incredible asset, James Armistead, an enslaved man who was serving as a double agent, pretending to spy for the British, but actually loyal to Lafayette. Armistead fed Cornwallis false intelligence, making Lafayette's forces seem much larger than they were.
Inflating his numbers.
Exactly. And then another American soldier, Private Charles Morgan, pretended to desert to the British. He reinforced the lie, telling Cornwallis that Lafayette had gathered enough boats to ferry his entire army across the river if Cornwallis tried to escape that way.
So Cornwallis believes he's outnumbered and that escape is impossible.
It seems so. Convinced he's trapped and potentially overwhelmed, he digs in deeper at Yorktown, fortifies his position, and sends increasingly urgent messages to Clinton in New York asking for help, for relief.
But Clinton's still thinking about New York City.
Still largely fixated on New York, thanks to Washington's brilliant deception. He does eventually organize a relief fleet, but it sails far too late. By the time it even gets close, it's all over.
And meanwhile, Washington and Rochambeau are marching south.
Yes, an incredibly impressive forced march, hundreds of miles. They link up with Lafayette near Williamsburg, just outside Yorktown, by mid-September. So now, Cornwallis isn't just trapped by sea. He's surrounded on land by a combined Franco-American army of around 16,000 troops. He only has about 7,000. The numbers are overwhelmingly against him.
Completely encircled. No way out. The siege must have been brutal.
It was. The Allies formally began the siege on October 6th. For nearly 2 weeks, day and night, artillery bombardment just pounds the British lines.
Relentless pressure. Was there a single moment that broke them?
The critical moment really came on the night of October 14th. The Allies needed to take two key British defensive positions, Redoubt No. 9 and Redoubt No. 10, to bring their own cannons even closer.
A direct assault.
Yes. Under the cover of darkness, the Americans, led by Alexander Hamilton, stormed Redoubt 10. Fierce fighting, bayonets fixed, but they took it relatively quickly, with surprisingly few casualties, about 34. Simultaneously, the French forces attacked and captured Redoubt 9.
So they took the key ground.
They did. And capturing those redoubts allowed the Allies to complete their second siege line and bring artillery to bear on the British from 3 sides. Cornwallis's position became completely untenable.
Did he try anything else? A last stand?
He mounted one last desperate counterattack on the 15th, trying to spike some Allied cannons. It failed pretty miserably. After that, he really had no options left. He had to face the inevitable.
So he sends word. He's ready to talk terms.
Yes, he agrees to capitulate. And then you have the surrender ceremony itself on October 19th, a very symbolic, carefully managed affair.
And Cornwallis himself, he didn't show.
No, famously, he claimed he was ill, indisposed. Most likely, he just couldn't face the personal humiliation. So he sent his second-in-command, General O'Hara, to surrender his sword.
Who did O'Hara try to surrender to? Washington.
He initially approached Rochambeau, who deferred to Washington. O'Hara then went to Washington, but Washington, maintaining proper military protocol, indicated that the surrender should be made to his own second-in-command, Major General Benjamin Lincoln.
Lincoln. He had been forced to surrender to the British at Charleston earlier in the war, right?
Exactly. So there was a certain poetic justice there. Lincoln accepted O'Hara's sword, the symbolic act of surrender, and then politely returned it to him, another customary gesture.
And the British troops marching out, that image we started with.
Right, marching out between the lines of American and French soldiers. Slow and solemn step, shouldered arms, colors cased, as one observer wrote, and the drums beating a British march, possibly, as tradition holds, the world turned upside down.
And the American feeling, relief, triumph.
Overwhelming triumph. Dr. James Thatcher, an American surgeon, called it a most glorious day. He wrote about the bitter chagrin and disappointment visible on the faces of the British officers and men. He saw Cornwallis as that vindictive, haughty commander finally brought low. You can feel the emotion there.
Understandably, a massive victory. But the war wasn't officially over yet, was it?
That's a really important point. Yorktown ended the major fighting, yes. It broke the British political will to continue offensive operations in America. But the actual war didn't formally end until the Treaty of Paris was signed, almost 2 years later, September 3rd, 1783. And then it had to be ratified, which happened in January 1784.
So nearly 2 more years of negotiations and occasional skirmishes. What was the immediate impact back in London?
It was a political earthquake. News of Yorktown hit Parliament hard. Debates raged. Motions were passed against continuing the war offensively in America. Eventually, the pressure became too much, and the Prime Minister, Lord North, who had led the government through most of the war, was forced to resign in March 1782.
And that set a precedent?
A major one. It was really one of the first clear instances where a government fell because it lost the confidence of Parliament due specifically to a military defeat and the handling of a war. A big moment in British constitutional history, actually.
So bringing it all back together, if we look at why Britain lost at Yorktown, was it fundamentally an intelligence failure?
You know, it's tempting to say yes, but the deeper analysis, especially looking at those British intelligence sources, suggests it's more complicated. It wasn't primarily a failure of intelligence collection. As we saw with Bancroft, they sometimes had very good information.
So what was it then?
It seems to be a combination of factors. Indecisive leadership, definitely. A complete lack of unified command. Clinton in New York, Cornwallis in the South, the Navy, all operating somewhat independently. A failure, arguably, to commit enough resources overall to decisively win in America. And definitely problems with communications and logistics.
And the intelligence they did have.
The key weakness seems to lie in the analysis and the use of that intelligence. The confirmation bias we talked about, the unwillingness to accept unwelcome truths, the failure to integrate pieces of information into a strategic whole. But here's the crucial takeaway. Even if their intelligence analysis had been perfect, it's honestly doubtful that better intel alone could have overcome all those other major strategic and leadership problems. Intelligence is vital, but can't win a war by itself if the fundamentals of strategy and command are flawed.
That's a really critical distinction. Intelligence matters, but it's not a silver bullet. Yorktown, then, was this perfect storm. British strategic errors and command issues meeting brilliant Allied deception, crucial French intervention, and solid tactical execution.
Couldn't have put it better myself. A convergence of factors leading to a truly decisive moment in American and world history.
So, maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. How often do we look back at history and pinpoint one single reason for a major event? When, as we've seen with Yorktown, it's usually this incredibly complex web of strategy, intelligence, politics, personalities, and even just timing and luck all interacting. What other historical turning points might deserve a closer look, revealing a much more nuanced story than the one we usually tell?
You have been listening to Battle Cry. Join us again next time.